Welcome to the Compliance Experts podcast, hosted by Vartan Consultancy. Miles Vartan and his guests, as experts in compliance and risk management, will guide you carefully and with clarity through the many sectors of compliance like health and safety, ISO and operator licenses, and the complexity of customs regulations. They'll also be talking about the latest legislation, global trade news, and the hot topics as they happen.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Compliance Experts podcast in early December. It's wet and cold out here, but we're going to warm you up with a fantastic conversation with Bruce Marques, who is Deputy General Manager at Milsoms Kesgrave Hall in Ipswich. For those who are catching up on our podcast, you'll know that Vartan Consultancy are risk managers, and over the last couple of months, we've had discussions with manufacturer in Stowmarket, Muntons, about reducing their carbon footprint. We've talked to Laura Thomas about welfare and mental health in the workplace. We've talked to a haulier about how he's struggling to keep his trucks on the road. But we also spoke to a driver from Lithuania. So putting that into context now, what we wanted to do was to have a chat with you, Bruce, because you're really in the headlines at the moment with the new COVID development. And I'm really intrigued. I know an awful lot about Milsoms, and I really enjoy coming to see you. So I'm really intrigued about how a business like yourselves has to react to this type of advice. But where we are based as well, we're based in Suffolk. We're blessed with a huge supply of quality local food. People down here like going out and like using hospitality, and I've seen people queue up in the dark, in the cold, to get into Kesgrave Hall. So, Bruce, nice to see you and good morning. How are you?
Yeah, very good. Thanks yourself, Miles. Thanks for having me.
Give us a couple of minutes about yourself. What's your background? How did you end up working for Top Line Entertainment Company in Ipswich?
Thanks. So as you can probably tell from the accent, originally South African, born and bred in South Africa, moved over to the UK just short of a decade ago, about 9 years ago now. Always worked in hospitality. It's always been my passion from the age of about 10 years old. I've wanted to run hotels and work in hotels. Followed my dreams, moved overseas. So I've moved around the UK quite a bit. Started off in Jersey in the Channel Islands, then moved to Sussex down in the southeast, to Plymouth down in Devon for a while. And then the opportunity came up to move to Suffolk to take on a very interesting new challenge in the form of Deputy General Manager at Milsoms Kesgrave Hall. Jumped at the opportunity to work for a company like Milsoms and to be involved in a business such as Kesgrave, which is always looking to develop. We're always looking to grow. I mean, as you say, it's the kind of place people genuinely do queue to get into at times, and to be involved with a business like that is always an exciting challenge. So I decided to jump in both feet, and I've been with the Milsoms group for just over 2 years now. Very interesting 2 years at that, with COVID and all the challenges that's brought both to hospitality and to the world in general. But 2 years that I'm really happy I have been involved with them as a business.
That's great, Bruce. Thank you very much for that. So knowing a little bit about the staff who work there, a lot of them from the local community.
Yeah, so our directors have quite an ethos within the business that we look to employ locally. We depend quite a lot on a very good local reputation as a business, both as a really good employer, a really good place to enjoy, to come and eat, to drink. I mean, I would probably say a good 30-40% of our team that we have at the moment are regular customers or kids of regular customers, people who've been to the restaurant before and have wanted to try become involved within the business. We advertise within all our public areas that we're always looking for new members of our team, and for them to be involved in something like that is great, because it shows that people appreciate us as a business and we become part of the family in some ways.
Yeah, and to be able to tell, you're new into it. You've either come back from university, you're still at school, and all of a sudden you're saying, "I've got a job at Milsoms," and they give you a nice black uniform, and you turn up for your first day. What happens to someone new who's never worked in hospitality before and then turns up at Milsoms, which is actually an incredibly fast-moving machine, and you've got to keep everybody happy? How do you induct them? How do you train them?
Yeah, so I mean, exactly that. It can be quite a fast-moving environment. It can be really fast-paced, but at the same time, induction and first day orientation, shall we say, is some of the most important times you can have with your team, both from a health and safety perspective and just from the first impression kind of perspective. From a first impression perspective, it's exactly that. It's that first impression. It's to get their employment off to the right start. So we like to sit them down, go through all the important paperwork, kind of P60s, emergency contacts, anything and everything you need from a team member to make them feel like they are safe, that they are well employed, and that they are going to be looked after. And then they get handed over to myself or one of the other senior managers, where we go through the important first day induction from a health and safety perspective. The key areas we always like to focus on is fire and fire evacuation, manual handling, and then general health and safety kind of talk. For me personally, having been through the experience of a hotel fire, it's one of the most frightening experiences you'll ever go through. And I take fire, health and safety exceptionally seriously, because had we not had the policy that we had in place on that night, we could have had far worse injuries, potentially loss of life. Whereas thankfully, because we had such a watertight fire policy in place, everyone was able to be evacuated from the building safely, no injuries to speak of. And, in that sense, a roaring success. In the sense of damage to a listed building, not amazing success. So,
no, where was that, Bruce?
That was down in West Sussex, at a hotel called Amberley Castle.
Right.
And again, like I say, it's frightening how quickly something like that can happen. But I always rest assured knowing that we, as I say, had such fantastic health and safety procedures in place that the key important area was that nothing happened to people. So the people who owned or ran Amberley Castle, you had your fire risk assessment and everything in place. We talk a lot about culture now, about having a positive health and safety culture. So health and safety isn't seen as a problem. Health and safety is seen as a way of looking after your staff, looking after your residents, looking after people who come for dinner. So would you describe the culture at Amberley Castle as like a real positive top-down? Yeah, so I mean, I always speak quite highly of the company that owned Amberley, in the sense of health and safety, that it was beyond reproach and beyond budget. The entire culture, as you say, in the corporate culture with health and safety, was that it is the single most important thing within any business. And it was the primary focus of any and every meeting. It was the first point of call for any inspection, whether it be from our head office or from anyone else. So it was a culture of excellence in many ways, and something that I learned and have carried through my career to other places, because, as I say, up until that point, I think I would say that, like a lot of people, my approach to health and safety was that it was something you needed to do in order to be compliant. Whereas when I saw those processes in place and saw how important an excellent health and safety procedure is, that it's not just there because it needs to be there, it's there to save lives and to ensure that people are safe. As I say, from that moment on, in many ways, my approach to it changed in a very positive light, that it is so important, because it sounds cliched and a lot of people say it, but in terms of a fire, you can replace things, you can't replace people.
Exactly. Exactly.
And it's something I try to drill into the team and get through to the team, is that I kind of dwell on fire many times, because especially in older buildings and in a hospitality setting, it can spread so quickly and can start from next to nothing.
And you got sort of voids that are being covered up by plasterboard to give you a nice smooth wall.
Oh yeah, of course. And again, we've got running gas. You've got you've got all kinds of things. We've got mains gas that's plumbed into kitchens. You've got voids, as you say, wood everywhere, flammable materials all over the place. You're dealing with boiling hot oil, and in some hotels, you're dealing with all kinds of flammable gases and things inside kitchens. And it can happen instantly. It's the same in terms of, again, having worked in fine dining restaurants and establishments where things like liquid nitrogen is used. You have to be so careful because that is at a negative temperature to what boiling hot oil is in positive terms. It's at a good minus 100 and something degrees Celsius. So can cause, frostbite burns and things like that. So to have procedures in place when using items like that, is massively important. In the same way you would approach a boiling vat of oil for making efficient chips, you need to approach the liquid nitrogen.
I worked in the brewery industry in the late 90s, and even then, health and safety as a subject was never reached the top of agendas. It was very, very rarely spoken about at board meetings, and we ran a lot of pubs. We were one of the biggest pub owners in the country. An awful lot of time was spent about the quality of the beer, and because you wanted people to drink a pint of beer and always want to come back for another one. Those who are familiar with the marketing world will understand which brewery I work for. And but quite often when we went to do cellar inspections, we would find that front of house was very smart. But the moment you went behind the bar, you noticed your feet were sticking to the floor, and it was a bit of a mess, and there was broken glass, and there was 2 bottles of orange liquid in front of you, and one of them was iron brew, and the other one was degreaser, and yet it was a strange world. You're going into this dark world of running a pub where all the emphasis was on looking after the customer but forgetting about your staff. And you didn't do that consciously. It was just you earned your money by selling beer. And we gave them a bit of a tough time if the beer didn't taste good, but we often had to spend a lot of time on housekeeping and safety and this type of thing. I know a top defence barrister in the health and safety world, and he'll always tell me a health and safety policy is only as good as the number of times you check it is working. At Milsoms, in the kitchen, down in the cellar, in the fridges, out at the back, you have a big waste food processing thing out the back, don't you, of the site? How often is there a checking regime to make sure that everything is being done properly? Yeah,
very much so. We are very strict on food hygiene and on cleanliness. The important thing when working in hospitality, is you've got to get it through to people that you're handling food. Food hygiene and food hygiene policies are paramount to a successful business. So we do regular inspections. Our head chef, executive chef, general manager, or myself at any time can do spot inspections of the team's fridges. In terms of the kitchen, a lot of time is spent with the younger members of the kitchen team learning, things like FIFO, the first in, first out method. So when receiving any orders, it's always important with the freshest ingredients to manage your holding stock and to also ensure that the first item in is the first item out. So, things like that take a lot of time to become instilled. But like I say, as a business, Milsoms takes it very seriously, and we do have that remit within our role that we can at any point do a spot inspection. We do have very structured inspections that the chefs do on a daily basis. However, in the mornings or later in the evening, just to walk up, open a fridge door and ensure everything is correctly labelled, correctly packed away, and everything's being done correctly is well within the remit of most of the senior team. Again, we invest in all the necessary equipment and in everything that the team need in order to make sure that everything is done properly, and we maintain our 5-star ratings from the local EHO when it comes to inspections and everything. So we and we always explain to the team that when it comes to health and safety, cost is not an issue. If we need to spend extra money on it, as long as we can justify it to our board of directors have a fantastic understanding and have fantastic support for us that health and safety is paramount and key within the business. So we're always willing to assist and help with that. And, we'll approve any expenses as long as we can justify them, as I say.
Now, it's going to be 6 weeks ago now, we spoke to a driver from Lithuania, from a haulage company in Felixstowe, and we were trying to work hard on getting to the root cause as to why we couldn't get more drivers into the business, why we couldn't get young people to go into driving, It isn't a diverse industry. There aren't many women driving trucks, although there's a little bit of press every now and again about somebody passing the test, but it's still a male-dominated environment, probably average age now of mid-50s, heading up to the mid-50s. So it's a real problem. We're 100,000 drivers short. A challenge in hospitality has always been the hours you have to work and how you balance that with pay as well. So you make it a rewarding career. But how do Milsoms manage the time? If I'm at an event in Milsoms and it finishes at 1 a.m, there's an awful lot has to happen, doesn't it, before you can go home and get everything ready to start up in the morning. How do you manage people's hours so that they're not working excessive hours and then potentially going to hurt themselves because can I come to work, they're not concentrating, they're tired, and they scold themselves or they drop something on their fingers or they don't concentrate what they're doing with a knife?
We manage it as best possible. Hospitality, as you say, is notorious for being an industry where you work longer hours than most. We are quite lucky as a business in the way our business is structured that we have a larger team than some other businesses, and we try and structure people's hours accordingly. So we will try to say to the team, look, if you finish past a certain point, please don't rush in the following day. We have enough members of the team to come in an hour or 2 hours later so that they still get that rest period between shifts. It's a very important thing having a rest between shifts. Like you say, from the safety aspect of not being tired and still working around sharps, flammable liquids, a multitude of potentially dangerous situations. So by managing the team and being flexible with hours and with structure, it really helps us. We also try to plan the rota in advance in a way that we don't put that pressure on people, automatically. So we will say, for example, we headed into the Christmas period when we've got our hangar in full swing at the moment. Hopefully the restrictions stay in a way that we can keep it in full swing. Some of the team can finish potentially at 1 o'clock, 1:30 sometimes, depending on what time the last guests leave and how long it takes us to turn the hangar around. Mm-hmm. And so when planning a rota, we will obviously look at it and say, well, if they're finishing at 1:30, they are ineligible in many ways to do the following morning's breakfast shift or even the earlier start. Why don't we put them on a 3 p.m. start the following day and work a shorter shift because they've worked a longer shift the day before?
Exactly.
Or even potentially, look, you're on a hangar finish, as we call it, but we've given you the following day off so that you can then have a nice sleep and enjoy a bit of time. And it's about flexibility. It's about pre-planning, about looking forward and ensuring that we structure it in a way that you don't just look blinkered at today and nothing else. You look at the whole week, the whole month as an entire picture and say, I don't want to burn any of my team out, so I'm going to focus on trying to get them away at certain times. I'd rather have 5 people on a 6-hour shift or a 5-hour shift than have 3 people on an 8 or 9-hour shift. And because we have quite a few younger members of the team and people who use us as a part-time employer while in university or A-levels, or we have some people who work full-time during the week and assist us on weekends.
Yes.
We always try to find the best possible solution for both parties. And sometimes people say, look, can I do 6 till 11 instead of 5 till 11? And, it's about flexibility and finding how it all fits together. And many times the rota is what I'd almost compare to a game of Tetris. So you're just fitting all the pieces together to make sure that it works as best possible.
Listen, I've sometimes been tempted myself to say I'd like to work behind the bar. There's nothing more nicer than pouring and making a nice drink for someone. So I might have to apply, do some extra hours.
Yeah, of course, Miles.
Exactly. I'd like to, as we move, we've been talking for a little bit, but I'd like to sort of come to 2 topics really, which are very topical. So you're from South Africa. The latest variant has developed in South Africa. So, and you're working for a very dynamic business, and every morning you must almost have to have an operational review. What is the latest news? What are the bookings looking like? How are we going to adapt yet again to make sure that people can, after all this time, come out at Christmas and have a good time and feel safe? And then the other subject I'd love to talk about briefly is, I read an article this morning the previous subject, I'm going to come back to government support as well, by the way, because I've read about what's happening in Ireland this morning. But then a thing that people are always talking about is healthy eating, how you eat well, but eat healthily. And again, there was an article in the Telegraph today about the government's latest initiative to tackle obesity. Apparently, it's something like since 1950, it's well into the hundreds of campaigns to tackle obesity, and every one has failed. Because in the UK, we buy food that has high sugar content. We buy food that is on the face of it looks healthy, but Mr. wrote the article, explained that in the 50s, when there wasn't an awful lot of food, money was tight, plates were small, Bruce. I remember looking at my parents' dinner plates, and they weren't these football pitches. They were quite small plates. People did a lot of physical work. People walked to work a lot. But then, as the years went on, processed food took a big downward dive. Just talk to us briefly about, if I go to a certain coffee shop, on everything I buy in that coffee shop, on the menu, everything has got calories beside it. I think personally that's a little bit over the top, but it's very helpful in terms of if you're conscious about your health, you're able to choose. It helps you decide what you're going to eat. How does the head chef tackle that problem? His other problem, he's a Man United supporter, I'm a Man City supporter, but how does he tackle those problems in terms of trying to make sure that people come away from Milsoms thinking, I can eat healthily and it's great. There's plenty of things there which I really enjoy. I'm going to come back again and I'm going to feel good after eating it. How do you have discussions about that as a group? Or
so we do. Our big focus is on fresh and local food. As you very wisely mentioned there, processed food has gone through the roof over the years, and it's a cost factor. People are worried about cost of food if there's a cheaper way of doing it, although that may involve the use of chemicals and numbers and everything like that. Whereas, unfortunately, at times, fresher food and healthier food costs a little bit more. So for us, our focus, like I say, is on working with the best quality ingredients when putting them on the plate. Our menus are constantly evolving and changing. We don't like to stagnate with the food offering at Milsoms. We like to change our menus every, I'd say, 3 to 4 months. And then again, it is a massive discussion topic. It's a very constructive time for our chefs to sit down, look at the menu, look for seasonal ingredients. What can we get locally sourced? What can we get that's seasonal? What can we get with a bit of provenance to it? Which is massively important in this day and age. A, for reducing carbon footprint, and B, as I say, the locality and the freshness of an ingredient often implies that it can be slightly healthier. There's exceptions to every rule. A deep fried fish and chips is a deep fried fish and chips, whether it's come from the ports of Felixstowe or afar. But the important thing, as I say, is provenance for ourselves, is healthy ingredients and quality ingredients going onto the plate. The menus, like I've touched on, we do evolve, we do grow, and our chef is fantastic in the sense of he understands that feedback is key. So whenever a new dish comes on, the first conversation he'll have with me is, Bruce, the first 5, portions of this dish, can you personally go to each table and do a check back and get some feedback? Let's see what customers think of it, because
that's great. Yeah.
We can taste a menu and I can think it tastes fantastic, but it may not be to a customer's liking. And then we can tweak the dishes, we can change the dishes. We can also see which of our dishes are popular, which of our dishes need a bit of improvement. And we can always work on a dish. We're a very flexible team. We're a very flexible hotel. We have people coming to us with, all kinds of dietaries, and in this day and age, a lot of food allergies, and you have to be so on it with food allergies. But our team are fantastic in that sense to be able to structure dishes accordingly. Some people can't have oils and dressings and butters and certain sugars and everything like this. And it's just about being able to best cater a dish to match our customers' expectations and our customer needs. I completely agree with the other point you touched on of trying to list calories next to every single dish. To me, is a frivolous exercise in some ways, and almost makes you feel guilty for having a dish. I've myself struggled with obesity, managed to lose 3.5 stone over the first lockdown. And it was about changing the way I ate, not necessarily what I ate.
Bruce, write a book.
Yeah, well, exactly. I think I might have to.
Food affects our mental health. Now, bear with me on this. So, we go out to make ourselves feel good. Mm-hmm. So, and in these times, we're now into years of struggling with the pandemic, going out and having a good time is very important. So I always think that the hospitality industry should be on the critical workers list. You're to keep hospitality going so that we can, and hospitality venues going so we can go and relax and spend our leisure time knowing that we're safe, but at the same time, keeping our minds balanced is very important. I mentioned about the Irish government, so I read in the paper this morning that Leo Varadkar, who was the Taoiseach, they're looking at reducing what we know as the furlough system, and it's all kicking in Ireland. And he has formed a majority in Parliament to, I think they're going to call it something different, but there's going to be a subsidy almost or some sort of relaxation in funds to the hospitality industry to make sure that it can be maintained. Because how do you run a business where every day the rules of the game are changing for you? And even then, when government ministers are interviewed on television, they can't give you a straight answer. So can I go out tonight and have my Christmas party? Well, as long as you stick by the rules, what are the rules? Do I have to wear a mask? That's completely down to you. We're not being, in my opinion, strictly my opinion, we're not getting clear leadership on this. So with the latest situation and people are considering coming out to Milsoms for their Christmas party, just give us some ideas of the safety measures you have in place to look after them when they arrive.
We've taken it very seriously the whole way through COVID. We've been very fortunate in terms of, whereas I can't speak for Ireland, we've had UK hospitality who've been a great sounding board for many businesses in the hospitality industry here in the UK. In terms of, as you say, every time government regulations are published, UK hospitality will then interpret them, and if we all sing from the same hymn sheet, it makes everything a lot easier for us. Within Milsoms, we've got a COVID risk assessment that we've constantly updated, and I think we're on to version 9 or 10 by this point, with all the different changes and relaxation, then lack of relaxation, then going forward, step back. But it is a living document. It's a constantly evolving risk assessment that we then implement throughout the entire business. We've installed hand sanitizers throughout all of our public areas. I believe there's about 16 or 18 of them wall-mounted throughout our hotel. We don't enforce the customers wear masks, because at the moment for hospitality, it is not a requirement. It is more just a personal choice thing. At the same time, we completely respect people's choice to wear a mask or not wear a mask. We've had quite a large investment into our terrace in the last few months in terms of putting sails up on 3 of the 4 sides. So for our customers who are still willing to brave the slightly cooler weather, we do have outdoor dining available. We've got blankets and gas heaters and everything to try and make it as comfortable as possible. However, it is still outdoors in winter, shall we say. But we've taken as many precautionary steps as humanly possible. We ask our team to take temperatures on arrival at the beginning and the end of a shift. We have a mountain of lateral flow tests that are always there if a team member should feel unwell, anything like that. We've got them there readily available. We're also quite willing to be flexible with team members and hours worked again. If someone isn't feeling well or feels like there may be a risk, we will cover the shifts. We'll let them get away, get a lateral flow test, isolate, because you have to take it so seriously. And with the amount of people that we interact with within any given day, we have to be on the forefront of it, and we have to be very proactive rather than reactive when it comes to COVID measures.
Knowing a little bit about Milsoms and being a relatively frequent visitor myself, I can tell everybody who's listening to this podcast that you'll be looked after when you go there. You'll have a great time, and there is the ability to be kept socially distanced. You can be separated, and you will go there and you'll say, "Thank goodness we went."
100%. And
you'll only be disappointed if you don't. So
yeah, we even looked into it as far as some of the tables we couldn't socially distance at first. We invested in kind of perspex screens, lovely Milsoms branded perspex screens to go between a few of the tables, which A, gave a slight feel of privacy because the two tables were relatively close together, and B, gave a nice aspect of safety because you've got a physical barrier between yourself and the next table.
Yeah.
And all these things do help. We even went back to the drawing board and found a stronger abrasive cleaning product in terms of percentage of germs killed and sanitization that we use now on all of our tables between every use. So although COVID being an airborne disease, we do still like to take the cleanliness a lot more seriously. And by going back and researching and finding different cleaning products that were more effective with less contact time, and introducing things like that, it's also helped us to update the cleanliness and to be able to sanitize our tables and every touch surface, much more effectively.
I'm going to finish this on try and keep this as balanced as possible, Bruce. But and we're going to go back to the fire at Amberley Castle.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't had first-hand experience of being caught in the fire, but I know people locally here in Felixstowe. There was a building called the Customs House, and it burnt down. And I know somebody was in there, and she's now a facilities manager for quite a big business in Ipswich with like 500 people in the office. And she always tells people about what it was like as she ran out of that building and the heat of the fire. And that no one was hurt, thankfully, but she remembers seeing the paint peeling off the cars through the heat of the car as she ran past them. And you did a great job earlier on about explaining about the importance of not only having a fire risk assessment done, but about living it, about making sure that everything's working, everybody knows how to evacuate, especially in a listed building where you're going to have imaginative stairwells and all sorts of very old access points and this type of thing. So everybody's got to be able to get out of the building safely. Just tell us in a few sentences, Bruce, what it was like in that inferno. What were the thoughts of people as they realised that this wasn't just a mess? This wasn't just an alarm. This was actually something real happening.
Oh, I mean, without being dramatic, I always say it's probably the worst night of my career. To be brutally honest, to see the building you work in, and any building for that matter, physically on fire and licks of flames coming off it, not realising the extent of the damage within the building because you don't want to go in. The first initial thought process is everyone out, is everyone safe? And that keeps playing through your mind over and over again. I mean, I must have done the roll call for the guests 3 times just to ensure that I didn't miss anyone or miss anything. Because it's the little things like that you don't think of. Is could someone have slipped through the fire alarm? Could someone have not heard it or got lost or done anything or not be at the evacuation point? It is frightening. In many ways.
And imagine it's very noisy.
It's chaotic.
Really hot. And what was the weather like outside at the time?
Well, so surprisingly, it was actually the evening of the Beast from the East about 3-4 years ago. Yeah. So it was. You've got snow falling, you've got people who've evacuated the hotel in pajamas because they've heard an alarm go off at midnight, and you are now stood out the front of a building in ice cold weather, snow falling, fire trucks, ambulances and police cars tearing up the drive, and you've got to really think on your feet. Like I say, where I was so fortunate was Amberley had such a watertight policy that we said, right, once we've done the roll call, we know everyone's safe and accounted for, we then escort them to this outbuilding where you're safe, you're warm, you've got tea and coffee making facilities, which is huge because that's the time where people can actually take a moment, sit down and actually gather their thoughts. They can have a nice cup of tea, and just take a moment. You're also finely well lit, so you can see if anyone actually needs first aid, and you can carry out that crucial first aid in that moment. People evacuating a building at, I believe the fire started 12:15 at night. 12:30 at night, evacuating a building could have twisted an ankle, could have cut their feet because they've run out barefoot, could have done a million things. So by just taking that moment where you escort everyone to a different location where you're well lit, you're warm, you've got a cup of tea or coffee in front of you, and you feel some form of safety again, is when all these things happen. But it's also where you can take stock. You can do another roll call and make sure everyone's got from point A to point B, and you can just take a deep breath, settle the nerves, and move on.
We could talk about that forever, but I'm half thinking that if I ever have trouble with anybody in terms of understanding the importance of fire risk assessment, I'm going to ask Mr. Milsom if I can borrow you to come and talk to them, because you've got first-hand experience of what actually happens. Now, those who are listening are going to understand that Bruce no longer has a problem with his weight, because he has no time to do anything else apart from looking after us as guests, making sure we're kept safe. And I'd like to thank you, Bruce, for your time and your candidness with us. And I think we've learned an awful lot. And I would encourage people to don't abandon the hospitality industry right now. This is the most important time. It's the seasonal period. Christmas is incredibly important. You're going to go to a professional organisation like Casgrave Hall, and you will feel safe and you'll have a great time. So, but look after yourselves and have a great Christmas. And we'll talk to you all soon. So thank you very much, Bruce.
Thank you very much for having me, Miles.
No, my pleasure. Now, for those who are familiar with our podcast, you'll find us on all the usual channels. We're getting better at promoting what we do. If you've got any subjects you'd like us to discuss, or even like to come on the podcast, then please let us know. You can get us on vartonconsultancy.com, and we really look forward to speaking to you soon. So many thanks, and bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Compliance Experts podcast. We highly value your input and welcome any questions, thoughts or challenges for us to tackle in forthcoming episodes. Varton Consultancy pride themselves in helping customers manage risk and subsequently helping them improve their overall company performance. To speak to Miles and his team, visit vartonconsultancy.com. This podcast is produced and managed by podtalk.co.uk and is the copyright of Varton Consultancy. This podcast is created for entertainment purposes only. Views and opinions are that of Varton Consultancy and their guests. Information recorded in this episode was deemed correct at the time of recording. However, we advise you to always check with Varton Consultancy for up-to-date information and legislation.